Dignitaries and participants, the side event on Nepal's experiences on National Adaptation Plan is going to be start now, and I would like to request you all to take the session. Mr. Chairman and Secretary of Ministry of Population and Environment, Chief Guest, Honorable Minister for Population and Environment, Special Guest, Honorable Presidents of the Parliamentary Committee on Environment Conservation, and Special Guest, Honorable Member of National Planning Commission, Honorable Member of Parliaments, Mr. Chair of the LDC Group, who is going to arrive soon, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. It is our great pleasure to welcome you all in this side event on experience sharing on Nepal's NAP formulation process and approaches. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you all here to share your views, opinion, and initiatives in supporting NAP formulation process in LDCs. Nepal launched the NAP process in September 2015 by organizing a multi-stakeholder consultation program. I would like to welcome Mr. Chair of the LDC Group. You are welcome, sir. We spent 7 months in finding seed money to engage professionals in NAP process. Our efforts and support of development partners materialized in April 2016 to engage 12 professionals to start up NAP process. Out of 6 months of experiences informs us to expand country consultative process for multi-stakeholder engagement and country ownership. The most important guiding principle is leaving no behind in the NAP process. Our approaches are establishing working group to coordinate stakeholders, utilizing existing coordination mechanism, building capacities and enhancing understanding on adaptation, building ownership and avoiding duplications, promoting multi-stakeholder participation, ensuring gender sensitivity and inclusiveness. Similarly, generating and utilizing knowledge and good practices, adapting development first with integration of adaptation actions, aligning with national policies and linking with recent initiatives. Similarly, synergizing ecosystem-based and community-based adaptation. Through this approach, 9 ministries are directly coordinating 9 thematic and cross-cutting areas, and Ministry of Population and Environment has the responsibilities for overall coordination, additional consultation, backstop support, quality insurance, and supporting for implementation. It is estimated that about 15,000 stakeholders will be engaged in this NAP formulation process. Nepal has considered 2018 to 2033 period as the medium term and up to 2050 as the long term to identify and prioritize adaptation options. After stock taking and capacity assessment, we are now engaged in climate trend and scenario analysis. This will lead us to start vulnerability and risk assessment in the spirit of IPCC AR5. Our science-based vulnerability assessment and consultative approach will guide us to prepare a NAC document within 2 years. This is our expectation, and we would also like to extend our sincere thanks to UNEP and GCF in providing funding support. With these few words, I would like to welcome you once again. Information sharing in this event will provide us additional impetus to move ahead. Thank you very much. And with these words, I would like to request Mr. Chairman and the Secretary of the Ministry of Population and Environment to facilitate the delivery session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lamsal, for your nice words. First of all, allow me to welcome all of you in the side event organized by Government of Nepal and ICIMOD. Without further delay, I would like to welcome Dr. Prabhu Budathogi, Honorable Member, National Planning Commission, Government of Nepal, to deliver his remarks.
Chair of this session, Chief Guest, Honorable Minister, Honorable Member of the Parliament, colleague from the Government of Nepal. And first of all, good evening. And probably you all are very tired, maybe just, trying to go back home. Maybe many of you are missing families, maybe friends, children. So all are maybe very, what you call this, very urgently thinking to go back home. But about this adaptation, Nepal is very much, a country where climate and weather is very important in terms of economy, in terms of culture, and almost all are very much revolved around, in climate and weather. Even our political elections are very much affected by weather and climate. So that means adapting to the climate and weather is very, very important for our survival. So now, due to this increasing global warming and this impact on our environment and the economy, we are more worried about how we can adapt better. So that means the project like this, which Nepal is trying to develop, this NAP, is very, very important for us. So that means the NAP, or the climate change adaptation, is very much mainstreamed or thought at the highest level of the planning. That means macro planning of the country. So what we say, development plan or periodic development plans. So we are now running on the 14th development plan. So where the NAP and the different issues of climate change have been very much included, and in most of the cases they are mainstreamed. And even we have climate change budget coding system. That means we more or less know how much budget annually the government will spend in climate change issues. And the NAP is one of the very important document which we are going to prepare, will guide us further to develop our national plans, as well as to streamline the resources, not only from the government or internal national resources, even the international resources, including the fund which may flow after some time from the Green Climate Fund. So the gathering here, or the meeting which we have now, is very important. Probably our colleague, we will share more about this, and maybe some of the ideas or some of the suggestions which you provide to us would be very important, which can be useful to further develop NAP in the future. So with this short note, what I want to assure you here, that if the NAP document is properly developed, which I'm sure we will be, that will be fully incorporated in our macro planning process. And being a person responsible for environment, climate change, agriculture, and other issues in the Planning Commission of the Government of Nepal, I sincerely hope that the document or the process will capture most of the issues, or as much as possible the maximum stakeholders, which Dr. Lamsal just mentioned, and it will be more participatory. not only that it will be discussed among the national stakeholders, we may have to discuss with international stakeholders, and by all this consultative process, the document would be good, and I hope that would be properly included in our national planning process. That means we will be able to internalize as well as implement these plans and the programs based on NAP in the coming days. So with this, I like to thank you, and thanks for the organizing committee or organizing group, giving me this opportunity to speak few words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member of the National Planning Commission. May I invite Mr. Janak Chaudhary, Chair of the Environment Protection Committee of the Legislative Parliament of Nepal.
First of all, good evening, Mr. Chair, Honorable Minister, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. I feel honored to hear with you all in this side event on sharing experiences of National Adaptation Plan process in Nepal. As a legislature, our role is to ensure the integration of environment and climate change provisions into new and existing legislations. It is my pleasure to inform you all that the Constitutions of Nepal 2015 includes environment as the fundamental right of the people to live in clean and healthy environment. The Constitution ensures compensations for the victims of the environmental population. It is also ensures to implement provisions of the conventions and agreements to the which Nepal is as a party. The Constitution empowers state and provinces for developing mechanism and implementations activities to adopt and build resilience to the changing environment and the climate. Nepal is the stage of translating constitutional provisions into legislative instruments. We as the legislators will closely look the climate sensitive development related bills to ensure integrations of our climate change. I do consider that we, the people's representatives in the parliament, will monitor the progress and support for NAP formulations and implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Chair of the Environment Protection Committee of the Parliament. Now, may I call upon Honorable Minister for the Ministry of Population and Environment, Government of Nepal, to deliver his remarks.
Mr. Chairman, Chair of the LDC Group, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to all in this event. Nepal is endorsing NAP formulation products to help our poor people to adapt and build resilience to the adverse impact of climate change. Visible effects of climate change are seen. Climate change has further affected our poor people. The NAP process will information us what adaptation options we should focus for the medium and large term. We will prepare our NAP words on NAPA and LAPA experience. I consider that climate change adoption is for the people, by the people, and to the people. I would like to thank all development partners for their supports to advance our adaptation in cities. I would also like to thank Green Climate Fund for announcing share it Marrakesha to support Nepal's NAP formulation process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for your remarks. Actually, we organized this side event in two sessions. In the first session, we heard the initiatives taken by government of Nepal, and we, heard, different views from the speakers. And there will be second session from the supporting organizations view. We will be hearing in the second session, and we will take the questions at the end. So in the second session, as a first speaker, I would like to invite Mr. Tosi, chair of the LDC group, to deliver your remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Bishwa, Nath, Oli. It's a pleasure to be here attending this event, and I'm very glad to see the Honorable Jaydev Joshi, who was in Kinshasa this year to attend the first LDC ministerial meeting. Let me also recognize here Honorable Janak Raj Shadari and Chairman Brabu Budatoki. And of course, it gives me great pleasure to see my friends Ram Prasad Lamsal and Naresh Sharma, who are so actively involved in this UNFCCC process. Let me reiterate that it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank Nepal for this invitation. The NAP process is of great significance to the LDCs, who are some of the most vulnerable to climate change, and yet have the least capacity to address it. Support for the NAP's process has been drawn out since parties adopted the Cancun Adaptation Framework at COP16 in 2010. Despite this challenge, many of our countries are committed to and have already begun engaging this process. Indeed, we consider NAPs as an essential vehicle for adaptation communications to be made under the Paris Agreement. Our fund, the LDCF, is mandated to support the preparation of our NAPs, in addition to continuing to support the implementation of the NAPs. But as we are all aware, the LDCF is in dire need of resources. In fact, some LDCs have submitted proposals for NAPs formulation to the LDCF, which are now stuck in the fund's pipeline. The LDC group continues to urge developed countries to enhance the support to the LDCF to clear the current backlog of projects waiting to be implemented without delay. Between the subsidiary bodies in May and the COP here in Marrakesh, it has become clear that much is happening from the side of the GCF to create ways by which LDCs can access funding for NAPs. And as a board member of the GCF representing the African constituency, I must humbly say that I was involved in discussions to ensure that all countries receive some adequate funding and some adequate support to formulate and implement the NAPs. The $3 million that has now been approved for each country to access towards the work on NAPs is one of the important milestones we have achieved this year. Yet, up until recently, no proposal had been approved. Agencies had been working with some of the LDCs, and I recognize some of these agencies here in the room. 12 as at an update we had this September, but only 2 of these might get the proposals approved this year. While this would be good news, it should not overshadow the demands and needs of the rest of all the LDCs. Therefore, a way forward could be to encourage the GCF, various organizations and entities to undertake practical steps in assisting all LDCs to access the funding. There needs to be more clarity from the GCF, in particular on the modalities and procedures for accessing support for the formulation of the NAPs. And this is wishful thinking, because I see a GCF, of my able GCF colleagues here will probably be addressing these needs. There are also needs to more clarity on procedures to support the implementation of NAPs once they are ready. And Juan and Clifford will certainly speak to these issues. Domestic processes such as establishing a mandate for NAPs are also important in ensuring adaptation planning is prioritized across different ministries and levels of government. Clear and coherent policies could help delegate responsibility for national adaptation planning and implementation. However, the best policies can still hit a roadblock when faced with a lack of funding. As LDCs, we also need to ensure we are aware of the support that is available to us, including the $3 million from the GCF, and use these resources as we embark on this process. Nepal is a good example to follow as the first country to accessing funding that was made available explicitly for NAPs. I hope we can have productive discussions tonight about how to move the NAP process forward to the benefits of LDCs. And like I said earlier to my Nepalese friends, I look forward to visiting your country. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair of the LDC Group, for your remarks. Now let me call upon Mr. Thinley Namgyal, Chief Environment Officer of the Climate Change Division, National Environment Commission of Bhutan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. I think the program says support, but I'm not really part of the support. So I'll share my experience with our NAP process in Bhutan. But as a former member of the LEG, I was part of the group that was working on the technical guidelines and also capacity building for many of the LDCs. And I had the opportunity a couple of months ago in visiting Nepal and also interacting with their NAP team. And I was quite impressed with how much progress they had done in terms of groundwork and working towards making the proposal for the NAP under the GCF. So they have a lot of groundwork done. The institutional coordination is quite impressive. So I think they're really ready to move on. Just to share our experience, we had also been waiting for several years now in terms of trying to get the NAP process off the ground, but the funding had been the issue in terms of, we were told there's funding available in the GAF and other places, but how to access it was always the issue, and what sort of ways we do this. And for the last few years, we had been working with the UNDP as well in terms of making a proposal for the GEF, but now we've switched over to trying to make a proposal to the GCF, because now, as you heard from the LDC chair, group chair, a lot of the projects are stuck in the LDC fund. So now we're looking towards the 3 million that's been made available. However, we did carry on. We didn't wait for this. We've been doing groundwork in our country as well, because now the NAP process is a long-term endeavor. We see that it's a long process. We have to strengthen our institutions in our countries for ensuring that it's a long process. It's not a one-off like the NAPA. So we do need the institutional arrangements, the legal frameworks, those sort of issues, so that we have long-run adaptation planning, then integration with the development plans, and then even the capacity, because this is going to be, we need the information, knowledge, the best available science, etc., to inform planning and implementation. So in the last year, we were basically piggybacking on other projects. So when we received funding to prepare our INDCs, we used part of the consultation process to sensitize our stakeholders and our agencies, our national agencies, in terms of what the NAP is, as well in terms of the overall climate change agenda leading up to Paris. And then also we have a NAPA project that we're implementing. So whenever we had consultations, we would piggyback on that and then try and build a consensus in terms of what it means for long-term adaptation planning, moving towards that. So we've not been waiting for the money to come, using existing opportunities to build on that. And then in terms of mandates, this is going to be, felt this is very important, especially ensuring a long-term process. So fortunately for us, we had a National Environmental Protection Act from 2007, which gave the space for us to use this. So it's a legal mandate in terms of the National Environment Commission as it's a cross-cutting agency. It's not a ministry, so it has representation from all key stakeholder agencies and even civil society on the commission itself. It's a high-level commission. So that has the mandate of facilitating implementation of environmental issues and also integrating obligations and action under the multilateral environment agreement. So we're using that as a basis. But the need during our consultations, we found that we need a clear and coherent climate change policy that would inform everybody in terms of the different roles and responsibilities of different players that we have in the country. So that's what we will be working on towards next year as well. But now I think we are looking forward to see how Nepal proceeds with the accessing the funds from the GCF. So I guess once the first project goes through, then it's a lot easier for us. They've gone through all the hurdles of trying to figure out the nitty-gritty details. I think usually the first one's the one that takes a while, then it becomes easier for us. So thank you to the team from Nepal for being the trailblazer on this. And just to say, I think in terms of how we see the NAP, for us, we are trying to also see three components, basically just to give an idea of flavor. So we want to strengthen our institutions. So at least under the 3 million to start, take a stock, see which institutions would be good in terms of research institutions, planning institutions, how do we reach down to the different levels, at the local levels, those sort of things, and strengthen their capacity in terms of long-run adaptation planning. That's one component. Then the other one is we want to focus on doing some in-depth vulnerability assessments for key sectors. And we, through our consultations, we've identified that water is going to be the key thread that ties all this. So we want to do an in-depth study on what it means for water. We are having a lot of issues of too much water in the monsoon and too little water in the dry season. So we really need to see what's driving this, what are the solutions in the long run. And then third, of course, now with the Paris Agreement, there will be submission of communication and plans and priorities, and the NAP will be a vehicle. So the third component is that way. So this is what we're looking forward to, and we're really looking forward to, I think, the Nepal experience and what comes out in terms of how we can follow after this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thinley, for your remarks. Now, may I invite Mr. Clifford Polycarp from Green Climate Fund to deliver your remarks.
Good evening, colleagues. Honorable Minister, distinguished guests, distinguished panel members, colleagues, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak here today. It gives me great pleasure because I'm doing this right on the heels of the good news we've been able to deliver to you earlier this week. As Tosi mentioned, the GCF took the mandate from Paris very seriously. It's been an effort that I know the LDC countries through the LDC group have been working very hard for several years to secure predictable funding for adaptation planning. We took the mandate very seriously, and then the board, with the hard work of Tosi and his colleagues, were able to make a decision in June to make available support for adaptation planning NAPs through both the readiness program, which is capped at $3 million, and that's the one that gets talked about a lot. But there's also an opportunity to go to the funding window for adaptation planning in multi-country programs. So there are other avenues as well to access resources for adaptation planning within the GCF beyond the 3 million under the readiness program. This decision was made in June. At that time, we were also going through a process of simplifying our processes for the readiness program. With the new mandate, we made an effort to try and integrate the request to cover adaptation planning within the exercise of simplifying the readiness proposal template. And that was then published shortly after June, sometime in July. Colleagues from Nepal worked closely with colleagues from UNEP to start to develop the proposal for the GCF. Similarly, colleagues from Liberia did so with UNDP. And in September, we received first drafts of these proposals from both Liberia and Nepal in September. Over the course of the next 8 weeks, we worked very closely with colleagues from UNDP and UNEP. Some very late night calls as well with colleagues visiting Songdo in Bangkok. I've had to pull people out of leave to come and work on these proposals over the last few weeks, just so that we're able to demonstrate coming into Marrakesh that we are committed to support the LDCs in their adaptation planning of efforts. We're very pleased to be able to have announced the support to both Liberia and Nepal earlier this week. We've only last week received 2 more first drafts from 2 more countries. And over the course of the year, we've also received expressions of interest in the form of letters from 14 other countries. So rest assured, Tosi, a number of your colleagues are working on the proposals, and we will be receiving, we expect that we will be receiving many of them in the coming weeks ahead. I do want to address one point that keeps arising as it relates to templates and guidance and procedures. We're at a stage where the GCF is funding adaptation planning for the very first time. Both Liberia and Nepal have taken the leap of faith, been the guinea pigs to start with, and I've gone through a painful exercise of trying to work through the kinks where we've been learning and they've been learning as well, and so have colleagues from UNDP and UNEP. The templates are not a constraint. The template exists. We've been flexible enough to be able to allow countries and the partners to adapt those templates in a way that they see fit for adaptation planning. So don't let that be a constraint. Don't use that as an excuse. Bring us your proposals. Sure, we need to develop guidelines and more standardized templates going forward. But we're at a learning phase, just as Nepal and Liberia have learned from this experience, early experience, and will share that experience with other colleagues. So have UNDP and UNEP. So are we. And we don't want to be too prescriptive too early. We want to understand what countries need. Different countries have different contexts, and we want to be able to be responsive in our support to countries' needs. So continue to work, continue to encourage your colleagues to work on their adaptation plans. At our end, we will continue to support you in whatever way we can. And hopefully in the course of next year, when we come back to COP23, we're not at 2, but many more. So with that, I will conclude my remarks. Congratulate Nepal on successfully receiving an approval from our end on their adaptation planning activities, and wish you all the best and look forward to working with you in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clifford Polycarp, for your remarks. Now our next speaker is Dr. Aditya Bahadur from Action on Climate Today, Oxford Policy Management, India.
A very good evening to the distinguished panelists and to the audience here. It's a real pleasure to be here. A big thank you to the government of Nepal for giving Action on Climate Today a chance to contribute to the remarks made. I think apart from that, I also want to give a big thank you to the government of Nepal for hosting the session that is so sharply focused on adaptation planning. I always feel that adaptation, at least in these big conferences, I always feel that adaptation is the ugly stepchild of the international climate policy debates. So it's wonderful to see a focused discussion on how nations are preparing to deal with the impacts of a climate change. So I think I'll just start off with a few general remarks on why I think it's so important to plan for adaptation, and then talk more specifically about the NAP process in Nepal, about which I know a little bit. I think it's very clear to us now that the climate impacts are having a big impact on economic growth across the world. In our own analysis conducted in a few states in India, we find that climate change will erode somewhere between 1.4% to 4.3% of the GDP of provinces or states in India. The ADB has calculated that South Asia as a whole will lose about 1.8% of its GDP until 2050, that is. And all these percentages sort of don't mean much. But if you look at a case like that of Kerala, we can clearly see that till 2050, Kerala's GDP will be 5 times what it is now. But if you factor in the impacts of climate change, it will only be 3 times. So it's vitally important to start planning for adaptation very carefully now. I think apart from the impetus of economic growth, of securing economic growth, there are clear justice and equity issues that adaptation helps address as well, because we all know, and no one better than countries in South Asia, that the poor and vulnerable suffer the most as a result of climate change. Let's look at 2 examples. Let's look at Cyclone Nargis and Hurricane Sandy. In the former, 138,000 people died. In the latter, only 43 people died, whereas the intensity was roughly equivalent. Again, if you look at the case of the Haiti, the earthquake, we see 225,000 people died in Haiti, but last week in the earthquake in New Zealand, only 4 people perished as a result of an earthquake of a similar magnitude. It's not only the difference between developed and developing countries. Marginalized populations suffer much more as a result of climate change, making the need for adaptation planning that much more. 77% of the people killed in the South Asian tsunami in Indonesia were women. Similarly, 61% of the people killed as a result of Cyclone Nargis again were women, showing the differential impact of big disasters, some of them climate related, some of them geophysical, on vulnerable populations more. Climate impacts are also likely to push people deeper into poverty. We saw this in the case of the floods in Pakistan, where flood affected communities were plunged 15% more into below the poverty line as compared to controlled populations. So it's not only doom and gloom, it's not only preventing economic losses, it's not only about justice and equity. I firmly believe that robust adaptation planning can deliver a resilience dividend. We've conducted some research in Tabasco and in Mexico and in Senegal, and found that putting in protective infrastructure and doing robust adaptation planning helps grow the economy and attract jobs and grow industry. So it can be a real pathway to economic development as well. So these are some sort of clear imperatives for adaptation planning, making what's going on in countries like Nepal that much more important. And that's also the reason why the Action on Climate Today program that I work with is providing direct technical assistance to government in 9 locations to affect transformational shifts in the policy architecture for adaptation mainstreaming. And we're doing sort of interventions in 4 domains. We're working in to make agricultural systems more resilient by doing climate proofing value chains and climate proofing agricultural policies. We're working in climate resilient water management, and looking at issues of floods, issues of transboundary management of river basins. And we're working on climate finance, helping subnational governments and national governments devote more of their domestic budgets towards adaptation, while also clearly determining a need for the quantum of finances needed for robust adaptation actions. We've also helped prepare Odisha's funding application for the GCF, which Clifford, you'll be receiving soon at some point, that the Indian government has approved. And we're helping develop institutions and institutional mechanisms such as the NAP in Nepal. And I think there are a lot of lessons on what's working across the areas where we're working, which is Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and Nepal. And I think a lot of the best practices are really reflected in the NAP process that is unfolding in Nepal. I mean, we firmly believe that working towards strengthening government systems from the get-go is the right thing to do. We've seen far too many flash-in-the-pan, donor-driven projects doing experiments that don't really find themselves influencing policies at the national level. And therefore, it's great to see that the adaptation planning process in Nepal is owned so heavily by the government from the get-go and led so ably by the Ministry of Population and Environment. It's also, I think, best practice to ensure that different streams of knowledge come together to help define the adaptation priorities that are fit for purpose in any context. And we clearly see this happening in the NAP preparation process in Nepal, where ICIMOD is doing robust scientific top-down sort of analyses of exposure and vulnerability. And we see bottom-up understandings of how the climate change is really impacting vulnerable populations through household level surveying that's going to come together across the 9 thematic working groups to really influence the adaptation priorities that get accommodated within the NAP finally. We also think that it's vitally important to choose multiple entry points for comprehensive adaptation planning processes. We can't only use the environmental entry point or forests as an entry point. You have to attack the problem from different entry points. And again, that's evident in the NAP process in Nepal, in which so many different ministries, including sectors such as tourism, are involved in determining adaptation priorities. So it's quite a comprehensive and holistic approach to adaptation planning. Finally, vertical integration is being hailed across the board as vitally important to NAP formulation processes in many different countries. And again, this is a place where Nepal can show the way as within the thematic working groups, as a systematic way of engaging with district development committees and village development committees to really ensure that the priorities that will get accommodated in the NAP flow from the bottom up to the national level. Because we've seen far too many plans developed at a national level that don't really reflect the realities on the ground. So this vertical integration becomes really important. So these are 4 things that I think are going really well. One thing that I think is clearly on the horizon of the NAP preparation team within the ministry, but one thing that I'd like to underline really important, that I'd like to underline and highlight as vitally important, that is very important to put in place a robust mechanism to measure results right from the get-go. So Nepal should be able to measure how well it's doing on adaptation and how it's building the resilience of vulnerable populations across the board as a result of the NAP from the beginning. Let's not put in an exogenous M&E process later. And I know this is already under discussion within the NAP formulation process. We recently did a review of the dominant approaches for measuring resilience and we looked at about 60 different frameworks and found that there is an overwhelming emphasis on looking at outputs and less of an emphasis on measuring outcomes. So it would be my request to the NAP preparation team to focus very clearly on outcomes. Let's focus on ensuring that people's well-being continues despite climate shocks and stresses, as opposed to measuring only capacity building events as an indicator of adaptation success. But on the whole, I'd like to highlight that I think many countries that are undergoing the NAP preparation process have a lot to learn from the robust process that has been put in place with Nepal, and the Action on Climate Today program is privileged to be able to support that in whatever way we can, and we hope to continue that support going forward as well. So a big thank you again to the government of Nepal for inviting our program to present some of our lessons and learnings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Aditya. Now let me invite Dr. Bimal Ragmi from ICIMOD for your remarks.
Chair, Honorable Ministry of Environment and Population, Government of Nepal, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take this opportunity on behalf of ICIMOD to really appreciate the leadership of Honorable Minister, Secretary, and all the team from Ministry of Environment to especially organize this wonderful side event and to showcase Nepal's experiences on the NAP formulation process. I think it's a beginning, but it is really a stepping stone in terms of really showing the leadership on how countries take initiatives on NAP formulation process, and it is especially a learning for other LDCs and developing countries. We're very happy again to see in the last 2 days that Green Climate Fund has supported or has agreed to support Government of Nepal to expedite the NAP formulation process. I think this will add value to the already going initiatives on NAP, and it will further strengthen the capacity of the government and the Nepalese stakeholders to drive the NAP formulation process in the future. I represent International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD. So ICIMOD is an intergovernmental organization. We work in 8 countries in covering South Asia and the region, basically the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. And ICIMOD's headquarters is in Kathmandu, and we work across the 8 countries. So one of the major goal of ICIMOD is to facilitate the exchange of knowledge and regional networks among member countries. And we also strengthen the networking among researchers, government institutions, civil societies, and practitioners and communities, so that the knowledge is really exchanged, and that will lead into policies as well as improving the practice in order to enhance the resilience of mountain communities. Overall, we aim or aspire for developing socially and economically a sustainable future for mountain communities, so that it is robust enough to really deal with externalities as well as issues that is related to climate change. Mountains are both ecological as well as economically significant in terms of social security and ecosystem integrity. And ecosystems and the landscape really provide a home or a livelihood or habitat for large number of communities, millions of communities that depend on that resources. The Himalayas especially provide water for 1.3 billion people dependent on for their survival. So mountains are fragile ecosystems that are particularly vulnerable to climate change. There are already evidences and robust scientific evidences showing that the warming trend is massive in the Hindu Kush region, that is leading to fast retreat of glaciers, impact on the ecosystem, impact on the livelihoods, and it is also leading to extreme climatic events that is causing huge economic and social losses. So climate change is one of the concern. That's why ICIMOD as an intergovernmental regional organization has that liability to really work with countries, especially support the countries in terms of generating knowledge that will help to enhance the decision-making process, and especially help with technology and practices that are directly linked with improving the resilience of poor and vulnerable mountain communities. And one of the major initiatives of ICIMOD recently is to fill the knowledge gap, the white spot that is seen in IPCC, that there is huge lack of knowledge and understanding of how climate is evolving, how it is impacting the mountain ecosystem and people. So ICIMOD is coordinating the Hindu Kush Himalayan Monitoring and Assessment Program. That is a new initiative which intends to produce a comprehensive assessment of the Hindu Kush region. So we are going to produce the report next year, and we hope that it will really help to fill the knowledge gap and assist the mountain countries. There are other key priorities that ICIMOD works on to enhance knowledge and practices, to develop technologies and practices that will directly help the vulnerable communities, the sectors, and the population dependent on, especially help government institutions to devise institutional mechanism, governance structure, financing modality, and a knowledge platform that will help to exchange information and knowledge among the Hindu Kush Himalayan countries, so that it is a forum that will enhance policy and decision-making process. In the NAP process, we are very fortunate as well as happy to be part of this whole initiatives. We have started from Nepal, and we like to extend this support to the Hindu Kush region, to Bhutan, to Myanmar, and other countries. So it is a great privilege to be part of these initiatives and support government of Nepal. We're providing support in terms of our capacity in climate trend and scenario analysis, technical support in 4 major thematic working areas where ICIMOD has that strength and capacity, especially on forest and biodiversity, water and energy, gender and social inclusion, and livelihood and governance. Specifically, we provide scientifically robust data and analysis, mostly on trend and scenarios So we want to downscale this projection to 5 by 5 kilometer range. So that is one of the major achievements that we want to see, which will really strengthen a location and context-specific analysis of climatic trend that will help the decision makers to be really precise in terms of designing the adaptation planning and practices. Another area of our expertise that we really want to offer to the government of Nepal and other countries in the region is methodology of risk and vulnerability assessment. Risk analysis is an additional component in the NAP formulation process. So in terms of methodological design, context-specific methodology is really important. Through our experiences and our piloting in the region, we'll bring that experiences and support the government of Nepal and other countries. In terms of tools, there are different tools in modeling, hydrological modeling, climate modeling, as well as socioeconomic assessment and analysis that could be of help to the NAP formulation process, so that in terms of designing mid-term and longer-term adaptation needs, it will really critically help to examine and understand the whole social, political, ecological, climatic processes, as well as those drivers that will lead to change, including climate change. So these tools will enhance those kind of assessment process. Then we have approaches that will help to link upstream and downstream, to link vertical and horizontal linkage, as well as institutional and other linkages that will help to really establish a robust NAP process. And adaptation knowledge that we have gained through piloting and experimenting in Hindu Kush region countries, that experiences and knowledge will be really valuable in terms of designing adaptation options, technologies that will be good for short term, medium term, and longer term. So these kind of knowledge consolidation and compilation or sharing will be another area of support, as well as research outcomes. We have carried out different research in different areas. So the research outcomes publication will be really valuable for the NAP process. And not the least is capacity building for the government institution as well as other stakeholders involved in the process. As a way forward, what I really like to emphasize is NAP is a really good opportunity for Nepal to really take leadership, as well as show that we really develop a robust, people-oriented, and contextual NAP process that will be really relevant for learning to the other LDCs and developing countries. In future, I think there is a need to streamline institutional expertise, experiences, funding resources through multi-stakeholder participation and country-driven process. So we need to strengthen that streamlining process for the NAP. There are some areas which needs a bit of careful attention, and I'd like to draw that attention to you. One is, how do we really build on science, local knowledge, and community of practice? So that is one of the key challenges that we have to bring all these things together in a consolidated manner. Second that I like to highlight is how we move away from projectized mode to a more programmatic and strategic vision for long-term sustainability of mainstreaming initiative. So if we say mainstreaming, then it has to be sustainable. And to make it sustainable, we have to really graduate from project towards more programmatic and strategic vision. So that is one of the challenges still with the NAP process. So another last one is, how do we really ensure more harmonization and alignment with development initiatives, as well as other government priorities of SDGs, Sendai framework for DRR, and other national and international convention and priorities. Saying this, let me again congratulate Ministry of Population and Environment for organizing this wonderful side event, and I really wish you all good luck for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bimal. Now, let me invite Mira Fida from UNEP for delivering the remarks.
Thank you, Chair of the session, Honorable Minister Yoshi, dear friends and colleagues. I'm very pleased to be here in this occasion and address this event in particular because it is taking place a few days after the very great news of approval of the very first project for national adaptation planning with support from GCF resources. And that is, in fact, something that also coincides after my talk that I had with Mr. Oli in Kathmandu a month ago, when we met together to co-chair a steering committee meeting of one of the projects that UNEP is supporting Nepal to implement, where I was asked the question about when are we going to have this project and what is UNEP doing together with our team to have this project approved. And of course, I had not a clear answer to give to him, but I was very pleased to see him today and congratulate him. And both of us, I mean, celebrate, and this is a moment of celebration of this achievement. I take this opportunity to also thank you all, the Honorable Minister and Mr. Oli, for your leadership, because the leadership, as it was mentioned by the previous speakers, is key and fundamental in taking these processes really forward. And the NAP exercise for Nepal has really demonstrating that. Working with Nepal for UNEP doesn't come by accident. We have been working with Nepal, and Nepal has been always willing to be the first country. Our history in working with UNEP, in many years, we have been impressed by the intention of this country to be always the first one, and that includes many occasions, and I will mention a few of them. We started implementing our first flagship program for implementing ecosystem-based adaptation with 3 countries, and Nepal was one of those countries. We started implementing our South-South Cooperation Initiative funded from Special Green Climate Fund, and Nepal was one of these countries, and this is why we met in Kathmandu a month ago. We submitted the first ever project to the Least Developed Country Fund on the implementation of ecosystem-based adaptation, and that was done through Nepal. So that shows the willing of this country to take always the lead and be the first one to start implementing initiatives that might have not been implemented or other countries haven't maybe dared to implement so far. Nepal has also been a strong supporter of the NAP process following its inception in 2011, including through its leadership of the process of developing the technical guidelines for the NAP process, by being a member also by leading the LDC group. And together with Nepal and other partners, not only UNEP being part of this community of undertaking the NAP process, we started learning and having and establishing a common understanding of the NAP process. And by implementing many initiatives for adaptation, including those that I already mentioned, together with Nepal, we learned a few lessons which have been, setting the foundations for the project that we have submitted to the GCF for the formulation of the NAP process. And this includes the lesson, one of the key lessons is that the NAP process and adaptation itself is not a one-time activity. And that is the reason that in their proposal for GCF, they were thinking and they proposed to include the setting up of a mechanism that brings that process of NAP formulation and implementation in cycles. They also learned that long-term information is key in developing national adaptation planning process, and that is why they decided to go for filling every gap that exists in the national setting in terms of national planning to inform their long-term policy and adaptation process. Building on the lessons learned from the NAPA and LAPA is fundamental in not only in developing the NAP process, but also in setting up their national mechanisms for coordination. And finally, developing a NAP process does require finance and a monitoring system. And that is why they are now proposing to develop a strategy for funding the NAP process, including through national and private sector sources of funding, and also creating a national monitoring system of the NAP process. Being the last speaker, I don't want to keep you any longer, but close this statement and the remarks from UN Environment by saying that we really appreciate working with Nepal. We appreciate their leadership in not only on climate change but also on protecting the global environment. And I would like to invite them to start working in setting up the project implementation unit as soon as possible and start the implementation, the NAP process, by being always the lead in this process and sharing lessons and experiences with other countries through many platforms, including the South-South cooperation, which they are also being a part and a lead of. Thank you very much. And thank you for your support and trust in UNEP in working with you on climate change and environment.
Thank you, Armira. We heard diverse views from different speakers in this side event in both the sessions. I would like to express my sincere thanks to all the speakers for your thought-provoking speech on lessons learned and support initiatives in advancing the NAP in particular to the least developed countries and other countries as well. Now the floor is open for discussion, and I welcome inputs and comments and questions from the audiences if you have any. And please provide your name and the organization affiliated, and also please provide the questions or comments to whom you want to address to the panelists. Yeah, the floor is open now.
Hi. Hi. My name is Siri, and I'm with a group called Climate Generation based out of the US. We primarily work on climate change education, but also policy advocacy. But I have a question regarding what Dr. Bahadur said about women being disproportionately impacted by climate change, or, well, I guess geophysical natural disasters and climate change. Could you just elaborate why that is the case, and if there are kind of these gender considerations incorporated into national adaptation planning, or if there isn't, what could be done to increase that?
Yeah, I think there are no more questions or comments from the floor. Let me invite Dr. Aditya to, okay. First, the response from Dr. Aditya, then we'll go to the second one.
Thanks a lot for that question. I think it's a pertinent one. There are a number of reasons why women are particularly vulnerable to climatic and non-climatic disasters. As in one example, many of them are charged with overseeing sort of climate sensitive activities at a household level, collecting water, collecting feed for cattle, etc. So that's one of the pathways through which they are affected more. They also have less control over assets, which allows people to buffer shocks. That's another example of the reason why women are more affected. Taking on board this understanding, it's wonderful to see that the NAP process in Nepal has given center stage to the particular vulnerabilities of women and other marginalized groups. One of the 9 thematic working groups is exclusively based on gender and attempts to mainstream that across 7 other sectoral working groups. This way, it'll be a given that the NAP will be sensitive to the particular vulnerabilities of women. I will share with you immediately after this publication on that explores the reasons for this in greater detail. But yeah, again, another area in which Nepal has shown leadership in mainstreaming gender in the NAP process.
Thank you very much. My name is Sindhu. I work for the Ministry of Forest and Soil Conservation in Nepal. Although I come from Nepal, I'm not from the same ministry as the Population and Environment, because the Ministry of Population and Environment is working in mostly in adaptation, and we, the Ministry of Forest, work mostly in mitigation through RED+ process. So my questions to all of you, Bhutan and UNEP and also GCF. So when we go down to the grassroots level, it is very hard to distinguish between the effect of mitigation and the adaptation. So do you have any ideas? I mean, first the Bhutan. So Bhutan told that it got some experience and some lessons from Nepal. But because Bhutan has got about 70% of forest, so how are you integrating forestry sector contribution to adaptation and NAV and also the mitigation? My question to UNEP: do you have any plan to support the mitigation, mostly the RED+, and also to GCF? I had the same questions in the last GCF and climate RED+ program the other day. Are you planning to earmark some funding to RED+? Because I can see as a red person in my country, I can see RED is being marginalized and being diluted in the broader context of adaptation and mitigation. Thank you very much.
If there are any questions, please. If not, then I would like to, okay, down there.
Hi, good evening. My name is Tania. I'm from Nicaragua and working at the moment in the Climate Service Center in Germany. I'm trying to do some work on regarding adaptation planning, so it's of my deepest interest, your process. So I would like to know if I understand that you are like in the beginning of the process, but if you have already some kind of ideas on how you will prioritize the different measures that you may have according to the sectors and your vulnerabilities and resources, and how participative you expect this process to be, also the decision-making process in order to identify which measures to implement. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tori Greaves. I'm a graduate student at Yale University and also previously worked for IUCN Nepal Country Office. I'm curious, as you're in these beginning stages of formulating the NAP, considering that in Nepal, especially in rural areas, there are lots of young males who are leaving to work abroad, and there's kind of a feminization of rural areas and lots of kind of now lands that are kind of fallow and a lot of work burden that's put on women in these rural communities. So I'm curious, especially because this process is handled by the Ministry of Population and Environment, if that's a consideration that's being folded into the NAP, and kind of how you see what are some strategies, perhaps you can just discuss some strategies that you think you might incorporate in that regard.
Now I request the panelists to respond the questions raised from the floor. First, Mr. Thinley, then Armira, then Clifford for the first question.
Okay, thank you. I think I had one direct question, but I could probably share some experience with the other two as well from Bhutan. Well, the third one from Bhutan. In terms of the gender, I think the NAP process itself, from the formal process from the UNFCCC, there were certain principles that we all agreed to, and gender is one of the main ones. So it's country-driven, should be best available science as well, but also that you have to consider gender and vulnerable groups is also one of the key principles. So I guess Nepal has taken to that to heart as well in terms of doing this. Then in terms of the relationship between mitigation and adaptation, and as rightly pointed out, we do have a lot of high forest cover in Bhutan, 70% of the land. So we do have a lot of the synergies and the linkages between mitigation and adaptation action. And this is also reflected in the INDC that we submitted last year. So in the our mitigation component basically said we want to maintain the forest cover sink, and our emissions are lower than our sink. So we said we want to maintain the carbon neutral status. So protecting and managing the forest cover is going to be key to that. But then when we look at the adaptation priorities, we also put some adaptation priorities in the INDC, saying that we would submit a NAP later, but we said conservation of forests is also important for ecosystem services. So in terms of water for drinking, water for hydropower, and even I think cross-border downstream, ICIMOD works on this a lot as well. So downstream, whether it's in India or in Bangladesh, in terms of siltation and reducing risk of floods and other extreme events. So it's there's a lot of synergies that we're looking at as well. And in terms of renewable energy as well, for us, most countries and other places, they look at renewable energies as a mitigation option. We are thinking it's more an adaptation for us because we depend so much on hydropower. We're almost 100% depending on the hydropower for electricity generation. So if something's happening to our water cycle, the water systems, if the glaciers, there's something happening, we need to diversify to other sources, whether it's wind, solar, and other sources of energy. So there's a clear sort of that blurring of lines between that. And then I think another one in terms of, I guess you mentioned the feminization in Nepal. What we're finding in Bhutan is actually, it's the elderly are getting left behind. So it's not a particular agenda for us. There's a lot of the rural-urban migration, and when the youth go, they don't come back. So it's usually the elderly who are being left behind. So that's something we need to pick up in our context.
Yeah, Edna.
On the question with regards to the support to mitigation, Tinley mentioned the principles around which the NAP process is built on, and country-drivenness is one of them. And of course, I mean, when we talk about adaptation planning, we will take that into account. And if the country wishes to address measures that, and this is what we are encouraging the country to do, measures that are co-benefiting, like, for example, addressing forests, restoration, or land degradation, which have also, I mean, mitigation potential, but they are also used as adaptation options. And this is what UNEP does, I mean, very well. And we have a long experience now in using ecosystems as part of the adaptation strategies. Yes, I mean, we will support. We will support if your question was about doing that in the context of NAP development process. Outside the NAP process, the answer is absolutely yes, because for those who don't know, UNEP is one of the agencies that is supporting the UN RED program together with other agencies, UNDP and FAO, and we are supporting many countries in the process of not only developing the plans, the strategies for RED+, but also moving towards results-based payments. I don't want to cover for Clifford in here because I'm sure he's going to respond to the question on what GCF is doing, but at the last board meeting, I mean, I'm going to say only that, I mean, there is an open door for countries to start also using GCF resources for RED+ or, I mean, sustainable forest management. So I mean, for this question, I'll stop here and I'll hand it over to Clifford from GCF. There was another question on the participatory process. I mean, how participatory the NAP process is going to be. It was mentioned that in the process of the NAP, development, Nepal is setting up or is building on its previous experience of using technical working groups. Some of them are those that have been established since the NAP and NAPA and LAPA formulation process. Some of them are going to be renewed, or one new one, if I'm not wrong, the cross-cutting one is going to be, two cross-cutting are going to be newly established. With that said, I mean, that shows that how well they are thinking of bringing all the actors together, and togetherness is key, is fundamental in undertaking and formulating a NAP for a country, including Nepal.
Just to give you a scale of the ambition, Naresh ji can speak more to this, but I think the ambition is to consult almost 15,000 people in the process to prepare the NAP. So it's like intensely and deeply participatory.
Thank you very much for that question. To build on what Urmira said, first and foremost, I will say that I want to also address your point about it being the fact that dealing with forestry and land use issues is really a cross-cutting issue, and this is first and foremost reflected in the fund's results framework. We have 4 strategic impacts on mitigation and 4 on adaptation. And one of those 4 strategic impacts in both mitigation and adaptation covers the forest and land use sector. Secondly, we've to date approved about 27 projects. 6 of them cover forest or land use in some form or another, both from a mitigation adaptation perspective. And we've also had the first RED Plus project approved in Ecuador. So in that sense, the GCF is certainly recognizing the cross-cutting nature of the issue, and also sort of already supporting investments on this front. There is still work to be done on results-based payments, which Urmira mentioned. Board has mandated the Secretariat to work on some further guidelines on how do we operationalize this in the context of the GCF operational modalities. So this is something we will be revisiting later this year or early next year for a board discussion to further develop guidelines on how do we operationalize results-based payments.
I request Dr. Bimal to respond to questions raised by the participants.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just like to respond the comment made by Tanya regarding adaptation planning and how the ideas on how do we really prioritize. I think in the NAP process, as you see, it builds on the participatory and inclusive process at different levels. So one is at the central level, another is at the subnational, and another is at the local level. In terms of adaptation prioritization, basically we build on experiences that is already there when you referring to the NAPA process. So multi-criteria analysis is one of the tool that NAP process will refer to. But in order to identify what are the criteria that will be used, you will prioritize participatory criteria identification at the community level, at different level, so that the communities or the involved stakeholder or institution will be involved in both identifying the criteria that can go for the multi-criteria, and as well as involved in really prioritizing the adaptation options. So the prioritization happens at different levels. So from the local, then regional, and at the national level. So that is, in terms of methodology, that is one of the participatory process. But we still will still explore on what could be more inclusive and participatory process and tools that is there in the region and that is more applicable for Nepal, that will be given priority by the NAP expert team. On the second question from the Yale University, I agree with you that there is a trend of migration, mobility, we say, in terms of from rural to the urban area, seasonal migration, seasonal mobility, and from going abroad. But one of the opportunities that we see within the agriculture and nutrition thematic working group is how do you really use the remittances that comes from abroad and how do we really mobilize that remittances in financing adaptation or building adaptation capacity at the local level. So through our experiences of piloting in the region on looking at how mobility migration has impact on climate change, or how the decisions at the household level is impacted by the migration patterns. So one of the area of interest will be that, and building on this remittances as one of the opportunities to really diversify economy as well as contribute to the social security. This will be looked into what adaptation options can be enhanced through this mobilization of remittance. So from positive side, we'll look into that. From negative side on this migration or displacement, there will be strategies in the disaster risk reduction thematic working group where this kind of resettlement or other adaptation capacities will be explored. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
I have a question too. My name is Laureta Tibra, coming from the Ministry of Environment in Albania. I heard here during the briefing that you are going to undertake a risk analysis for identification of the priority actions or the measures for addressing climate change during your NAP formulation process. My question is, are you going to do it from the scratch, this risk analysis, or are you going to build up on the existing studies that you actually have during these other processes that Elmira mentioned? And the second question is regarding to the participatory process. How much is involved the Ministry of Finance in these processes? Because considering the experience that we have in the NAP process, actually, we have seen it as very important and crucial, especially for the strategy, for financing strategy. Thank you.
Yes, well, I am Jesus Martinez from Sustenta NGO from Spain. I have a question for Mr. Thinley from Bhutan. Well, I think one of the gift Bhutan has given to the world is a concept of the gross national happiness, GNH. We've been all these 2 weeks talking about how climate change affects the GDP, but there are very little studies about how climate change affects the GNH. Maybe it's more robust, more resilience to climate change. I would like to hear some comments about it. Thank you very much.
I request Dr. Bimal and Dr. Lamsal to respond to the first questions, and Mr. Thinley for the second one.
So I would like to respond from the last part, how participatory the NAP process could be. While looking the whole perspective, we can differentiate it from 2 parts. One is the process, the second one in the content. So actually the NAP formulation is the fusion of process and content. So a content can be prepared by a team of experts by giving some time, 1 or 2 months, 3 months, or whatever the length of time our expert can prepare the document. The matter is the process by identifying the correct stakeholders. So that's why the original concept note of this NAP formulation process has already defined different thematic area, different level of stakeholder, and different level of type of consultation to be carried out. That's why I spelled out that nearly 15,000 people will be consulted. That is the part. And we have previous experiences of developing NAPA and LAPA. That has already been in place. So from that, we can extract some information. From that experiences, we can have a lesson in developing this process. Besides that, I would like to give an example. Nepal is very much experiences in community-based and stakeholder-based systems. Giving the example, community-based energy program, community-based energy, community-based irrigation. Moreover, it is also renowned for community-based forest management, that is community forestry. So we have already been internalized this process as the part and partial of developing either to local level plan or regional level plan or national level plan. The second part of the question is how the ministry is financed Ministry of Finance is going to be coordinated with this NAP formulation process. So we do have a 3 level of coordination mechanism. At the apex level, Prime Minister is chairing the Climate Change Council, in which Minister of Population and Environment is the member secretary, and Minister of Finance is the member. That's why that is the one of the coordinating body, the top level coordinating body. The second tier of the coordinating mechanism is multi-stakeholder led coordination initiative, in which there are representatives from Ministry of Finance too. In the third tier, at the project level, there are also the project steering committees and coordination committees, in which there are representatives from Ministry of Finance, not only from Ministry of Finance, but also from National Planning Commission and the major ministries related to climate change. I've tried to answer, but I'm not sure how much did I cover. I would like to give the mic to Dr. Bima.
Thank you. So just my small response to the risks analysis will build on the existing experiences that we have already. So the government of Nepal, mainly Ministry of Population and Environment, have conducted economic assessment, risk assessment. So there is already methodology and experience there in terms of looking on risk analysis within the sectors. So the approach will be in the sectors, this risk analysis will be carried out, but it will be based on the existing knowledge and experience. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Thinley.
Thank you. That question, I don't know how many of you know about that gross national happiness. We get a lot of interest about that as well. For us, at least I'm in the civil service, so ours is we are sort of the technocrats who work on delivering services, and so we take that more as an approach to this. I have colleagues and friends back home who do this more as an academic study in terms of well-being and those sort of things, and how much it means, and is it going up and down. But in terms of our development planning also, we do take the GNH as a principle in terms of how we should deliver services and development to people. So, and as our Prime Minister said, if in the end it's the happiness and well-being is not improving, what's the point of the development providing, whether it's economic or infrastructure, those sort of things. So in how we look at it, it's so right from way back, I think this phrase came from our fourth king in the 70s. Soon after he was crowned, he was asked what's the GDP of Bhutan, and he replied saying, I consider gross national happiness more important than gross national product. So that's where it comes from. So right from the early stages when we started the development process, it's more like there are other dimensions to development rather than pure the amount of money that's circulating in the economy. So and just reflecting quickly here, I think in terms of what we're doing here in terms of climate change and also the NAP, there are certain parallels in how we look at it. For us, broadly, when we say approach to GNH development, we look at it in terms of, first of all, equitable socioeconomic development is one key dimension. We need, after all, to feed ourselves and have the basic necessities. And then the other one is looking after the environment conservation, because there's such a close linkage in terms of the well-being of the people, and also our economy is driven by hydropower, and also the majority of people depend on agriculture and forestry services. And then the other one is the looking after the cultural heritage. So I'm here in my national dress today. We had a high level, the head of delegation delivering the address on that way, but we also consider our cultural heritage very important in terms of this as well. And the last is good governance in terms of how we ensure that we have efficient, effective. So in terms of looking at the NAP as well, the process, I think it's in there. It's to integrate into development. The key is within the context of sustainable development as well. And then the best available science for the environment is there as well. And then the cultural thing, if you look at it, we have to acknowledge traditional ecological knowledge as well as part of the principles in the NAP. This came from other countries. It's during the negotiations process, and good governance. That when I mentioned mandate, it's for we want a durable system. So that's how we look at it, I guess. So in terms of parallels, in terms of studies, frankly, I don't know too much. I haven't been looking at it, but I know the research is ongoing.
So looking at the time, I would be brief in concluding this session. Honorable Minister, Honorable Parliamentarians, Honorable Member of the National Planning Commission, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, allow me to thank all the distinguished speakers and the participants for their presence in this side event. The speakers have eloquently shared experiences on NAP and its importance to reduce climate vulnerabilities especially in the least developed countries, including Nepal. So we are encouraged by your presence here, and we do value and count on your support and enthusiasm. We look forward to working with you and promote collaboration in sharing knowledge and experiences, and engage multi-stakeholders to address the ongoing and emerging threats of climate change in the medium and long term through the NAP process. I would like to thank UNEP, Action on Climate Today, UK8, and ICIMOD for providing support in formulating the NAP process in Nepal. And also, I would like to join hands to thank the GCF for recently approving the proposal of Nepal on National Adaptation Plan formulation. Similarly, I would like to thank to all the individuals who contributed to make this event a success. With these few words, I would like to thank you again all for your presence and inform you that the closure of this side event. Thank you very much.